The Time and Space of Uncle Albert by Russell Stannard. First published 1989 by Faber and Faber Limited. Chapter 1. The Light Beam That Got Away. Turnip wants us to do a project, Gedanken announced. Turnip? Repeated Uncle Albert. Mr. Turnip, the science teacher. We have to choose a topic, a scientific one. Then, she added with an air of importance, we have to research it. Research it? Exclaimed Uncle Albert, looking as though he were going to burst out laughing. Yes, said Gedanken indignantly. We have to research it, and write up the results in a folder. Sulkily she kicked a stone. Hard. She was wearing trainers, so it hurt, but she didn't let on. She was very fond of her uncle, but he could be so annoying at times. She hoped one day to be a famous scientist like him. That's why she had hoped he would have been pleased at her news. Now she wished she had stayed at home and watched television. Sensing her disappointment, Uncle Albert apologised. Sorry. It's just that, well, we didn't do that sort of thing when I was at school. What's your topic? Gedanken shrugged. Haven't decided yet. Alison's doing dinosaurs. Francis Alexandra's doing something on volcanoes. Turnip says I could do energy in the home. You know, double glazing, electric toothbrushes, that sort of thing. But I'm not sure. I'd like to do something really interesting. They reached the park, and Uncle Albert thankfully sat down on a bench. Gedanken joined him. Together they looked up at the sky. It was a lovely starlit night. Isn't that just beautiful? Began Uncle Albert. You know, when I was a boy, I used to wonder how far away they were, the stars. I thought they were little lights stuck on the inside of a great big dome. One night it was just like this. I saw my dad's ladder leaning up against the wall. Right up to the gutters it was. He was mending them or painting them or something. I can't remember. I climbed to the top without him knowing, of course. I reached up as high as I could, standing on tiptoe. I tried to touch the stars, but there was nothing there. They seemed as far away as ever. I've never forgotten that. He seemed lost in wonder at the recollection of that childhood discovery. Well, how far away are they, Uncle? Oh, a long way. Yeah, but how far? Oh, he paused, lost for words. So far that it takes years for the light to get here. What? Gedanken was not sure she had heard him correctly. Yes, years. That light we're looking at now was given out years ago. It's taken that long to get here. But why? It doesn't take time for light to go from one place to another. When I put on a light at home, the light goes everywhere all at the same time. Not quite, explained Uncle Albert. It only seems to get everywhere at once. That's because rooms are small. You don't notice the tiny time it takes for the light to go from the lamp bulb to the walls. But out there in space, it's different. The stars are a long way off, and their light takes ages to make the journey to us, and that's despite how fast it goes. Well, how fast? 300,000 kilometers a second. He saw her looking blank, so he added 186,000 miles a second. She still didn't seem to take it in. 5 times round the earth in the time it takes you to say rice pudding. 5 times. That's right. That's how fast it goes. And it still takes years to get here from those stars, even at that speed. They continued to sit there gazing up at the sky, lost in thought. Suddenly, Uncle Albert sat bolt upright and exclaimed, I've had an idea. I've been wondering lately about light, how it behaves, and what it would be like to actually catch up with a beam of light. One of those beams of starlight up there, for example. Yes, of course. Why didn't I think of it before? How about you giving me a hand? You go and chase one of those beams and tell me what it's like. Gedanken looked at him suspiciously. She had heard people say he was eccentric. She didn't quite know what they meant by that, but it sounded as though they thought he was a bit odd. There were times, like this, when she thought they might have a point. Are you all right, Uncle? She inquired anxiously. All right? Of course I am, he explained, springing to his feet with surprising agility. Come on, we've got work to do. And with that he started hurrying off in the direction of the house. But, Uncle, I don't understand, protested Gedankin, catching up with him. How am I supposed to do it? You just said that light travels fast, and that— I'll show you, he said, interrupting her. In fact, this could be your project. How about that? A piece of real, genuine research. Ha! He snorted. That'll show old Turnip and his electric toothbrushes. And with that he grabbed her hand and eagerly pulled her along. By the time they got home, Gedankin was thoroughly exasperated. Uncle Albert still hadn't explained what was going on. As he took off his coat and was about to enter his study, Gedankin planted herself firmly on the front doorstep. "You're not going another step until you answer my question," she insisted. "How am I to do it?" "Well, in a spacecraft, of course," said Uncle Albert, as though it were obvious. "A spacecraft. You want me to chase a beam of light in a spacecraft?" "Yes." "Ha, ha, ha," she said mockingly. "Now pull the other one." "Eh?" "Well, let's face it, you haven't got one, have you?" "Haven't I?" he asked in amusement. And as he brushed past her, he beckoned her to follow him. "But I don't for one moment believe—" And they entered the study. Her voice trailed off, her eyes opened wide, and she stood rooted to the floor in astonishment. What on earth? The room was dimly lit by the embers of a fire, and by a desk lamp that had been left on. The walls were lined with books. On either side of the fireplace were two comfortable, well-worn leather armchairs. It was something above one of these armchairs that had caught Gedankin's attention. It was like a gigantic soap bubble. About a metre across, it was almost spherical, but slightly squashed at the top and the bottom. Beneath it, to one side, were two smaller bubbles that reached down towards the top of the high-backed chair. They wobbled gently and glinted mysteriously in the half-light. "What is that?" she questioned. "That, it's a thought bubble," Uncle Albert said in a matter-of-fact tone. "A what?" "Thought bubble, you know, thought bubbles like you get in cartoons, things that go over people's heads when they think." "Yeah, but you only get those in comics. I didn't know they were, well, real." "Not surprised. There aren't many of them. Not many people think hard enough to produce one." Uncle Albert sat down in the chair under the bubble and waved Gedankin to sit in the chair opposite him. She did so, still looking up at the bubble uncertainly. As she watched, it seemed to fade away at times, and then to brighten up again. "Why does it go and come back like that?" "Depends on how hard I'm thinking." "What?" Gedankin paused, not quite sure what question she wanted to ask next. "What does it do?" "Anything. It can do anything at all. All it requires is imagination. Lots and lots of imagination. Whatever I think of comes up there in the thought bubble. Tell you what," he added, "you watch." He closed his eyes. To Gedankin's delight, in no time at all, a black and white cat began slowly to come into view in the bubble. It looked incredibly real. As she watched, it began to lick its fur. It then looked up, winked at her, and disappeared. Uncle Albert opened his eyes. "Did you see that?" "Yes," said Gedankin excitedly. It was just like a real cat. It's amazing." Uncle Albert grinned. "Tell me, Uncle," she said, "if you thought of me, would I end up in the thought bubble?" Uncle Albert thought for a moment. "I reckon so. I've never tried it out on real people before, but I think it will work." "And if you thought of a spacecraft?" Uncle Albert nodded. "And what if you thought of me being in the spacecraft?" "Exactly. That's what I guess would happen. You'd get beamed up into the spacecraft. Then you'd be able to chase that light beam for me." He looked at her intently. "Gedankin, I've no right to ask you this, but as I've told you, I've been trying to understand the behavior of light. I've got stuck. I can't fathom it out. I need someone to chase a light beam for me and tell me what it's like when you catch up with it. I can't go myself. I have to stay here doing the thinking. So I was hoping—" Gedankin's heart was pounding. She looked anxiously at the bubble and gripped the arms of the chair. Then she looked across at Uncle Albert. "Is it, well, dangerous?" she asked. Uncle Albert shrugged. "Shouldn't have thought so. But, as I said, I've never done this before to a real person." She thought for a moment, then nodded timidly. Uncle Albert smiled reassuringly at her. "Okay then," he said. "Here goes." He closed his eyes, rested his chin in his hand, and his face became concentrated in thought. As Gedanken watched, there began to materialize in the bubble what looked like the interior of a spacecraft. There were curved metal walls, and set into them were round windows. Outside the windows she caught a glimpse of stars. Close by was an imposing array of dials, winking lights, and TV screens. This was presumably the control panel. Suddenly a rush of panic seized her. The bubble! Where was the bubble? It had gone. She had become so wrapped up in thinking about what was inside the bubble that she hadn't noticed that the bubble itself had disappeared. Not only that, but the chair arms she was gripping were no longer those of the armchair in Uncle Albert's study. They were the arms of a seat in the spacecraft. And in a flash she realised that somehow, incredibly, she was now inside the thought bubble. And not only in the thought bubble, she was in the spacecraft. She looked wildly about her. There was only one thought in her mind. Where was the exit? But before she could move, a voice boomed out.
"Hello there. Don't be alarmed, my dear. Nothing to worry about."
It had an artificial electronic sound about it. What's going on?" stammered Gedanken, trying to identify the source of the voice.
"Allow me to introduce myself. I am your computer, and it is my pleasure to welcome you aboard. I hope you had a pleasant trip up here."
She noticed some lights that winked on and off in time to the sound of the voice, and also a nearby screen that displayed the words as they were spoken. This must be a talking computer. "But where am I?" she asked, feeling a bit foolish talking to a TV screen.
"Why, you are in the spacecraft, of course."
"I'm actually in a spacecraft?"
"Not a spacecraft, if you don't mind," said the computer coldly. "This is the spacecraft."
Then, in a voice that sounded like a guide addressing a large group of tourists, it continued.
"This is the largest spacecraft that has never been built and never will be."
"Well, if it's never been built, how come it's here?" interrupted Gedanken, somewhat gaining in courage.
"By the power of thought, of course. Uncle Albert's imagination. There are no limits to what he can imagine. Now, where was I? Yes," the computer resumed. "This is the world's largest spacecraft. It is equipped with the most powerful rocket engine ever devised, capable of delivering all the energy one could possibly require. The spacecraft is designed to explore the laws of nature to their ultimate limits."
Gedanken looked about her. The spacecraft was certainly huge. It was like being in a vast, long tunnel. The far end was so distant she could hardly make it out at all. As for the computer, it sounded a bit pompous, but she was grateful to have anyone to talk to, even if it was only a pile of electronics.
"Right, madam," the computer started up again. "It's my pleasure to be the first to congratulate you."
"Congratulate me?"
"To congratulate you on becoming the first captain of this fine craft."
Gedanken was overcome. At first. And then she panicked again. "But there must be some mistake. I don't know the first thing about spacecrafts. I wouldn't know what to do."
"Not to worry. What do you think I'm here for? It's my job to look after you and see that everything runs smoothly. All you have to do is, well, enjoy it. Right, are you ready?"
Gedanken looked happier and nodded.
"Okay, strap yourself in."
She fastened her seatbelt.
"Now, all you have to worry about is that red button in front of you. When you want to start up the motor, you just press the button. Keep your finger on it for as long as you want the rocket to fire. All right?"
"Yes," she nodded, getting more and more excited.
"Okay, when you're ready, you can blast off."
Gedanken took a deep breath, reached out, and pressed the button. Immediately from the rear of the spacecraft there came a throaty roar of engine noise. She felt herself flattened against the back of the seat. "Ooh, it's how thrilling," she thought. After a while the computer called out,
"You can let go of the button when you like."
She did so, and the engine noise died away. No longer was she pressed against her seat. She had a floating sensation and felt she would go drifting off if the seatbelt hadn't continued to hold her in position. It was very pleasant once she got used to it. "That's our speed, is it?" asked Gedanken, pointing to a digital readout just above the button in front of her. It said speed relative to Earth and was reading 0.500 times the speed of light.
That's right, said the computer. We're now travelling at half the speed of light.
Well, then why aren't we slowing down?
Why should we?
Well, because the engines are off. We ought to be slowing down.
This is not a bicycle, the computer said in a superior tone of voice. This is a spacecraft. Once a spacecraft is up to speed, it doesn't need pushing any more. Out here, there is no air or anything to slow us down, so we just keep cruising along. We only need the rocket motor when we want to change speed, when we want to go faster or slower.
Well, how does a motor make you go slower?
By going into reverse, of course.
Above the digital readout was a large window, facing out the front of the spacecraft. Gedankin looked at the stars laid out before her. With each moment, she was feeling more relaxed and at home. She was really beginning to enjoy all of this.
Right, interrupted the computer. If you're ready, we had better get on with our mission. Uncle Albert has programmed some instructions into me somewhere. I'll have to look in my memory bank.
We're to catch up with a beam of light, Gedankin volunteered eagerly. There was a pause, and the computer resumed.
Ah, yes, quite right. Catch a light beam, he says. How peculiar. Suppose he knows what he's doing. All right, can you see one? There ought to be plenty about with all these stars out there.
Gedankin peered out of the window. Suddenly she pointed excitedly. There! Is that one? Directly outside, a shimmering glow sped by. It seemed to Gedankin to have a face, an impish face, and yes, it was giggling. She definitely heard a faint, high-pitched giggle, like an overexcited schoolgirl, and a teasing voice that called, "Go on, catch me if you can!" As it got further away, the fuzzy light patch got smaller and fainter.
"Yes," cried the computer. "That's one. After it, before it gets away."
"Easy," shouted Gedankin. "We're already doing half its speed." And with that, she pressed the button, and the engines roared into life once more, and they began to give chase. After a few minutes, the computer called out, "OK, that should do it. We ought to have caught up with it by now." Gedankin released the button and looked for the light beam, and her face fell. "Oh, it's further away than ever," she said.
"What? Further away? That's impossible."
"But it is."
"Can't be. What speed are we doing?" asked the computer.
0.900, 9/10 the speed of light, I think."
"Is that all?"
"Yes," she confirmed.
"How odd. According to my calculations, we should be easily doing the speed of light by now."
Gedankin heard a far-off voice giggling and laughing. "You'll have to do better than that."
"Give it another go," said the computer. "I'll put you on full power this time."
Gedankin pressed the button again. The engine noise was deafening, far louder than before. The spacecraft shuddered and shook in a most alarming manner. It was as though it were about to shatter into tiny pieces. After what seemed an age, the computer instructed her to let go of the button, and she thankfully did so. She peered out of the window. At first she could see nothing. Then she spotted the light beam. "Oh no, it's miles away now, and it's still going away from us."
"Impossible," said the computer. "What's our speed now?"
0.999 times the speed of light.
"Most irregular. The answer I've got is quite different."
Then, with a note of disgust in its voice, it added,
"I must have been misprogrammed. I've heard of this sort of thing. Never thought it would happen to me, though. How embarrassing. I'll have to do a check on myself."
Can't wait, must be on my way." Gedankin heard the light beam's voice dying away in the distance. The fuzzy patch of light faded and finally disappeared. "Well, how am I going to explain this to Uncle Albert when I get back?" she thought. And bang goes my project into the bargain. Then, with a rising sense of unease, she continued aloud. "In fact, how am I going to get back? Here I am, flying about at light speeds, and the only help I've got is a stupid computer that can't do its sums properly."
"Aha!" cried the computer. "It's all right. It's not a programming error. Everything is working properly. I've been working things out exactly as I was told to."
"Well, then how come you got the wrong answer, then?"
"The wrong answer?"
"Yes, the wrong answer for our speed."
"Ah, yes. I see what you mean. Good question. The wrong speed. I suppose I must have been fed the wrong equation. I have been working things out correctly, as I always do. But with the wrong equation. That must be it. The actual scientific equation must be wrong. How very strange. I wonder what Uncle Albert will make of that. You'll have to tell him when you get back."
"I am going to get back all right, aren't I?" asked Gedanken anxiously. "You know, with you doing your sums wrong and everything."
"I beg your pardon," exclaimed the computer, sounding very cross.
Sorry. I meant to say, with things being the way you said they were, am I going to be all right?"
"Oh, yes. No problem. I'll send a message to him right away to say that you're ready to be beamed down."
And sure enough, there was no problem. As mysteriously as Gedanken had found herself transported up to the spacecraft, so she now found herself back in the reassuring atmosphere of Uncle Albert's study. She immediately told him everything that had happened. "And there's nothing more to say," she ended. "We did our best, but the light beam was too fast for us." She shrugged her shoulders. "Don't you worry, my girl," said Uncle Albert. In fact, he was looking quite pleased with himself. "As far as I'm concerned, everything has worked out very nicely. Drink up your cocoa before it gets cold. You ought to be back on your way home in a few minutes." Gedanken picked up the mug from the small table by the side of her chair. She had, on previous occasions, mentioned that she was not all that keen on cocoa, but, as usual, Uncle Albert had forgotten. "What do you mean it worked out very nicely? I'm not going to be able to write about it in my project, and it was your idea in the first place that I should go chasing it. So aren't you disappointed too?"
"Disappointed? Not a bit of it. You see, I couldn't for the life of me imagine what it would be like to catch up with a light beam. That's why I had got stuck. So it's quite a relief that you didn't manage to."
"I thought you were able to imagine anything at all," said Gedanken.
"Oh, no, I don't let my imagination run away with me. I only imagine what might be possible. I don't waste time thinking of things that are absolutely impossible." He paused, searching for words. "Light is very special, Gedanken. It's always rushing about. And I do mean always. It just can't keep still. It's the way it's made. Its movement is part of what it is."
"Like dancing?"
"Dancing?"
"Yes. You move when you're dancing. If you're standing still on one spot, you can't be dancing."
"Well, yes, I hadn't thought of it like that. I suppose you're right, it is a bit like that. So, if you had managed to catch up with the light beam, it wouldn't have been rushing about any more. Not as far as you were concerned. It would be just have been like it was sat there doing nothing."
"I don't get it."
"Well, you know what it's like when you're in a car on the motorway and you catch up with another car in the next lane. You're both going fast, but it doesn't seem like it. The other car looks as though it's standing still next to you."
"Yes, I know that. So what's wrong with the same thing happening when we catch up with a light beam? Why can't we see that it's standing still?"
"Ah, but that's the point. With a car, we know what it is like when it is standing still. Cars spend most of the time standing still, in garages and car parks. But with light, it's different. There is no such thing as light that stands still. It's always lively, vibrating, going places. Light standing still wouldn't be light anymore. Like those dancers of yours. If they looked to you as if they were standing still, then they wouldn't be dancing anymore. Not as far as you are concerned. Light never stands still, so it can never look as though it's standing still."
"But it will look as though it's standing still if we catch up with it," insisted Gedanken.
"If, my dear, if," exclaimed Uncle Albert. "That's what I'm getting at. We can't catch up with it. That's what you've just found out for me. And because we can't catch up with it, we never do see light looking as though it's standing still. It's amazing. It's beautiful. Why hasn't anyone thought of it before?"
With that, he triumphantly punched the air like a footballer scoring a goal. He always did get excited when a big thought hit him.
"We're going to have to rewrite all of the science books."
Gedanken waited for him to calm down a bit. "But what if we got a bigger rocket?"
"A bigger one? No, my dear, that won't do at all. Don't you remember what the computer told you? The engine was able to deliver all the power you could possibly want."
"But this doesn't make any sense. There's no air up there or anything to slow us down, right? So what stops us going any faster?"
Uncle Albert thought for a moment. He looked round at the desk and said, "Pass me that notepad and I'll explain." Gedanken went to fetch it. "Now pass me the writing desk." She turned and was about to go back, but stopped. "Uncle?" "You said the writing desk." "That's right." "But I can't pass you the writing desk."
Why ever not? You passed me the notepad. Oh, don't be silly, Uncle. You know perfectly well I can't pass the writing desk. It's much too heavy. Aha! Said Uncle Albert, with a tricky look in his eye. The same girl who was strong enough to pass me a notepad wasn't strong enough to move the desk. And the reason was the desk was much heavier. Yes, so what's that got to do with the spacecraft not going faster? I'm explaining it. It's simple. The rocket motor pushed on the space capsule and got it to start moving. As the capsule got faster, the same rocket, pushing just as hard as before, had less effect. And when the capsule was travelling at almost the speed of light, the motor had hardly any effect at all, and it was still pushing just as hard. Why? Gedankin thought for a moment. You're not saying... Her voice trailed off. Go on, said Uncle Albert encouragingly. Are you saying that the capsule got heavier the faster it went? She ventured. It was like starting out pushing a notepad and ended up pushing a writing desk. Uncle Albert nodded. But why should a space capsule behave like that? She asked. What's so special about space capsules? Well, there's nothing special about them. Anything that goes really fast must get heavier. Not only the capsule, but everything on board got heavier as well. Everything? What, even me? Yes, even you. I got heavier. That's right. She looked down at her waist. I didn't even notice myself getting fat. Uncle Albert chuckled. No. It wasn't a case of putting on weight. You didn't gain any extra layers of fat or anything like that. Your body was still made of its usual stuff. It's just that the faster you went, the harder it became to push you and make you go along faster. But I didn't feel any heavier, she persisted. In fact, quite the opposite. When the motor was off, I felt weightless. If it wasn't for the seatbelt, I'd have gone floating around like the astronauts on TV. Ah, but that's something different. Normally, we get pulled down by gravity. Gravity? Yes. Uncle Albert held out the notepad, like this. He let it go, and it fell to the floor. Gravity did that. Gravity pulls everything down. Us, for instance. But the reason we don't fall like that notepad is that the surface of the Earth is pushing up on us. Well, it's not pushing up on me, said Gedankin, looking down at her feet, because the chair she was sitting in was too big for her. Her feet were not quite touching the floor. Uncle Albert laughed again. True. In your case, it's the seat of the chair that's pushing up on your bottom that stops you falling. Anyway, the reason you normally feel heavy is that gravity is pulling you down at the same time as something is pushing you up. And how is it different up there in the spacecraft then? Up there, you were floating freely. The seat of your spacecraft wasn't pushing up on you, so you didn't feel heavy. But when it came to pushing on you to try and make you go faster, then it was like trying to push something that was heavy. And the faster you went, the heavier you seemed to get. How very peculiar, murmured Gedankin, thinking to herself that whatever else got heavy, this conversation was becoming a bit heavy going. Uncle Albert got up and started to clear away the mugs. It's time you were going. Your mother will be wondering what's happened. As for me, I've got to think about this discovery of yours. We shall need a new scientific law, one that says things get heavier with greater speeds. Gedankin rose and followed him into the kitchen. She took the mugs from him and started to rinse them out. Why does this only happen when we get close to the speed of light? Oh, well, I suppose it doesn't. I suppose this happens every time we go faster. It's as though we get just that little bit heavier. Well, why haven't people noticed it before then? I can only think that in the normal everyday life at ordinary speeds, the effect must be too small to be measured. Well, how about when you travel in an express train? No, it would still be too small to notice, I think. A supersonic aircraft. The American space shuttle. No, not even close. The effect will be there, it must always be there. But it's only when you make the kind of space journey that you have just done, and travel almost as fast as light does, that it becomes noticeable. Tell me, Uncle, how heavy did I become? Well, when you were going at half the speed of light, you would have been about 5 kilograms heavier. Then, at 9/10 the speed of light, you would have been twice as heavy as normal. And towards the end, well, it's hard to say.
The digital readout ran out of 9s. But it wouldn't surprise me if you got as heavy as Buckingham Palace. Buckingham Palace? She explained in wide-eyed astonishment. Uncle Albert nodded. "Ah, that's amazing," she breathed. She got as far as the back door. She kissed Uncle Albert on the forehead and turned to go out, but stopped. A thought had struck her. "I say, Uncle, you know I was going to do a project on what it's like to catch up with a light beam. Well, now we know we can't catch up with it. Why don't I do one on why we can't catch up with it? I could tell them all this stuff about getting heavier." "That is a good idea. In fact, it is a very good idea." What a funny sort of evening, thought Gedankin, as she lay tucked up in bed. It's a good thing there was nothing on television. I might have missed it all. And for a moment she thought she saw the little light beams from her bedside lamp. They seemed to be chasing each other across the room to see who could get to the other side first. In a way, I still wish I could have caught up with that beam of starlight, but then it's not everyone can say they once weighed as much as Buckingham Palace. I wonder if I'll get in the Guinness Book of Records. She yawned, reached out and switched off the lamp. Old Turnip's going to get a surprise. Then she thought, but what if he doesn't believe it all? But in no time at all, she was fast asleep.